Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.
Blast off on another episode of Hero Paranormal Podcast. That's right, coming to you live from the base of La Madre Mountain. I'm Ryan, the original outlaw of the airwaves, bringing you a VIP episode of Hero Paranormal Podcast. Does the music you listen to affect your life? Does the music your kids listen to affect your life? Does modern music stunt us? Was the hippie culture a psyop? Music has more of an effect on us than I think we even realize, and it is a sensitive topic to discuss. Few have done the research our guest today has done. Simon Siddol has delved deeply into not only realizing the power that playing sounds has on altering people's moods, but the parallels between the way people treat themselves and the music they listen to. Well, that as well as possibly music and drug use. Are there parallels? Don't fall into the mainstream rut. There is a parallel between IQ and the music you listen to. And this isn't just bigoted information I'm spewing. There's really interesting scientific research and background to all of this. Does classical music make the mind work in a more beautiful way? Well, I don't know. But back in the times when people were listening to classical music, I can tell you that people were a lot more extravagant and colorful. They seemed to have multifaceted characters. They were amazing people that we make movies about nowadays. Men and women both wore wigs and makeup and used them equally. Not a thing was thought about any of this. And it's interesting that a return to those times might open our eyes a bit as to how the music can educate people. It's modern music that really worries me. Basic, repetitive, and we should be careful about thinking it's just music. I can't wait to talk to Simon, and I can't wait for you to hear what he has to say. Before we do, though, let me just touch base and ask if you've gone to heroparanormal.com. Just check it out. It's a nice little gateway to go to different other areas, whether that be listening to the archive or a particular episode. Check it out. And also, if you have a moment, check out spacewolfresearch.com. It's just a science project done for fun, in the best of intentions, in the worst of areas, and kind of interesting. So basically, that's all I've got to say. Let's get to it and talk to the man who knows much more than I could ever know about this. Simon Siddol is not only a musician, he is a music professor, a researcher who is very aware and a wealth of knowledge of the history of music, the consciousness-raising techniques involved, and, well, he has more or less set a goal for himself to show people that it's time for musicians and listeners alike to take up their shamanic powers and open their minds to the reality that music is magic and has magical qualities, much like frequencies and the like. I can only shed a candle's light on what Simon Siddol is about to blow our minds with. The wealth of information, the research he's done. A music professor unlike any other, here to show us how to empower ourselves, live better lives, help those around us, help our kids, and become more magically empowered. Simon Siddol, welcome to the Hero Paranormal Podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you about this amazing thing that you have researched. You're a music teacher. This unconscious, habitual use of music, actually like a magical force.
Hello, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, it's trust me, it may sound strange to your audience, but as a music teacher who's been researching altered states of mind and social engineering and conspiracy theory for years, it was a pretty horrifying realization for me too.
And Simon, how long do you think the powers that be, or whoever it is, the upper classes, have realized that they have some form of control over this music?
Well, I think that goes back millennia. There are, the well-stated records of the cult of Dionysus back in Hellenic Greece, whose entire kind of religious and magical practice was about being able to control the masses through wine, women, song. The practice of using music as a societal guide, if you like, or a societal hammer and anvil, if you like, well, it's recorded right back to there at the very least. And my personal view is that music in its infancy in human civilization was, in its first place, an entirely shamanic enterprise. It was there to alter people's minds. Now, back a long time ago when you simply had, 60 people in your Stone Age, not a village because they were nomads, but, 60 people in your family and one shaman who could sing songs that could change the state of your mind and the entire attitude of your village, then you knew who that person was, they lived with you, you had a relationship with them, and in all likelihood, they wished you the best, both physically and spiritually and emotionally. This is not the case anymore. Music, despite the fact that it is still capable of shaping people's minds in a very subtle and yet very complete way, is no longer in the hands of people who love you or care for you in the slightest.
No. And it seems like the musical undertones are far from spiritual, at least the music that you hear on mainstream radio.
I would call it anti-life most of the time. And the only reason that people do not balk at it as much as I hope that they would, to be honest, the only reason they don't is because we have been going down a slope with this for a long time, and that slope has been, in all probability, as far as I can see, deliberately engineered for us.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Deliberately engineered. That's a powerful statement and a powerful type of magic. And this may be one of the most powerful types of magic if it's able to lower a human's vibration. Is that correct?
I certainly think that's one thing it can do, yes. I think part of its power is the fact that, at least in our society, if you check over in India, for instance, or you check over in Japan or other places, you will find a completely different attitude towards this. But in the West, one of the things we have been programmed into is to simply seeing music as a harmless bit of entertainment. This is how most music is presented to us nowadays. The idea that it could be deep and involving art, which obviously it can be, is slowly being edged off the side of the plate, if you like. The amount of music which actually feeds the human soul, even though there may be just as much of it being produced nowadays as there used to be, that's a possibility. I honestly don't know. But what I do know is that it's now like trying to find a needle in a haystack, because what you might call the music industry, but what you might also call the machine, or even some form of AI, or some form of non-human intelligence. I would lump all four of those things in together and not exclude any possibility. That thing is producing so much automated, plastic, soulless music that it's becoming almost impossible to find the other sort.
Wow. Another powerful statement, Simon. Soulless music, and it is. It really is. This is, and it's what's scary is there is a, well, I guess kind of a, if you connect the dots, the game plan has been, the writing's on the wall. This happened in the 60s with here in the United States a bit with the LSD hippie movement and mind control with the music. Have you looked into that as well?
I have. That was actually part of the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I had, in my 30s, already researched a lot of stuff about societal control from various different angles, and I also understood that there were various philosophies pushing through the lyrical and sort of philosophical content of music that were vying for control of the population. But it was when I discovered the work of Mark Devlin on YouTube, who produced videos and a couple of books called Musical Truth, where he presents evidence for three-letter agencies, you know, the CIA, the FBI, you name it, becoming fully involved in the music industry back in the middle of the 60s. And I saw just how easy it was with their money and their connections and their psychological insight to simply just walk into a scene and take it over entirely. Because I think part of what Mark Devlin talks about is the idea that the original hippie movement, before the CIA got involved, was actually predominantly a passionately anti-war movement with strong political drives inside it. And they decided that that was too dangerous a thing in the US, and that they were going to take an element of what was at the side of it at the time, at the edges of that movement at the time, which was, Californian nudism and rolling in mud and smoking so much dope that you're completely incoherent. They took that little bit of what was going on at the side of it and decided to amplify it out of all proportion until it took over the movement, at which point, because everybody was so spaced out, it was actually quite easy to start injecting all sorts of other nefarious things into that movement by introducing new bands. So, yeah, it was when I discovered all of this through Mark Devlin's work that I began to, well, it became obvious to me, why would it have only started in the middle 60s? The recording industry has been in existence since the 1920s, at least. And I fully well know that, secret societies, especially ones that control our civilization's attitudes and philosophies, and even our art movements and such like, were fully functional and fully manned in the 1920s. I thought, well, surely it's going on there as well. And the last few years, I've been trying to trace it back through time, which is a very difficult thing to do, if not only because nobody talks about it on these terms. You can see the effects of it. You can see the symptoms of it sometimes going on. But to actually see the workings in the background, well, they're not really recorded, or at least I've never encountered them yet. So I'm working from, yes, I admit it, supposition. I'm working from intuition, but I'm also working from the simple question, cui bono? Who actually benefits from the trend that music is taking, the trend towards the inane, the profane, the anti-life, that it's, you know, we felt this 20 years ago when people were sort of dodgy about getting militant about saying such a thing, you know, because so many people would say, you're just getting old, granddad, you just can't hack modern pop music kind of thing. I think that's changed now. I think most people are looking at each other and going, yeah, there's demons on the radio, isn't there? Mm-hmm. What's going on? And it's time that we actually did something with this. It's time that both musicians, especially the musicians who have been wrapped up into the industry, both just in work, in the aspect of work, but also just in the aspect of their philosophy of how they produce music and why they produce music, and also audiences have to examine what they're doing, what they are producing, what they are consuming, and why. If not, if only for the reason that we have to understand that the possibility for poison inside that diet of music is considerably greater than we've been comfortable to believe, if you like.
Yes, and it's really scary, this power involved with the music, and not falling into the rut of listening to the mainstream, because it seems that the parallels between what people listen to and the way they treat themselves are there.
They are indeed. I in my teaching, I make two comparisons with music consumption. One of them is a comparison to the way people use self-administer street drugs, or even doctors prescribe drugs in order to modulate their emotional and psychic state. And the other allusion I like to make is between people's taste in music and people's taste in food, and an understanding that there is nutrition involved, so that, you know, you could have an endearing love for sugar frosted donuts. Why not? But if you let that infantile taste for little else but salt, sugar, and fat actually rule your adult choices, you'll make yourself very ill. And I like to I started making comparisons between this argument and your consumption of music a couple of years back, and I've still not come to the bottom of the number of different aspects of this comparison that ring true. We have to learn how to give ourselves a healthy diet.
Wow. Yeah, I sadly have to be honest and say that, you know, my choice in music, especially when I was an adolescent, was not top shelf menu. It was lower.
Yes.
Yeah, it was not the good stuff. But as I've gotten older, like you said, that grandfather effect has pulled in, and I've noticed I'm listening to a lot more classical music most of the time, and it really does affect your mood.
Yes. There is a subtle and complex thing that goes on with music and people's choosing of music. People rarely realize that, or at least they may realize, but they don't become fully conscious, fully cognizant, and therefore able to use that knowledge to finesse what they're doing. They do not understand why they choose the pieces of music that they enjoy listening to a lot of the time. It's a semi or subconscious process of choice. Sometimes you can even feel like you do want to listen to one kind of piece of music. You put it on for 15 seconds, you go, no, I don't want that at all. And you suddenly find something else that you weren't thinking of, but then your heart and your gut says, yeah, that's what I want to hear right now. So there's a demonstration of the fact that it's rarely the youngest bit of our prefrontal cortex, our most rational mind, that's actually making our choices about music. It's something deeper. And one of the reasons this is because one of the powers of music in a fairly simple form is its power to impart into us an emotion that we were finding difficult to access for ourselves. So this is actually quite possible to do with just a 3-minute pop song. To give it its most obvious form, if you're simply feeling a bit run down, a bit tired, a bit stiff, a bit sat in your chair for too long, putting a really rowdy piece of pop music on will poke your nervous system into remembering what it's like to be in a high energy state, and you'll find it easier to get back up there. Now, that's obvious to everybody, I suppose, but it's not just that sense of physical exhaustion that you can solve with a piece of music. There are dozens of emotional states that you can choose to move to a different place with what I refer to as a mono-emotional song, a song that only sticks in one emotion and just sits there until everybody listening to it has vibed with it and come into that emotional state. The trouble with using this kind of music, is that if we exclusively use that kind of music, or very, very regular to the exclusion of almost all else use that kind of music, and we rely on it to alter our emotional state, well then what's the difference between that and trying to cheer yourself up with a line of cocaine? Mm-hmm. It's not much different. The only difference is, and it's a very dangerous difference, is that we don't take music seriously enough to think that it can become such an addicting thing that we need to rely on just to modulate ourselves and remain in balance.
Wow. Yeah, we don't take it seriously at all. And, I mean, we use this to put our children to sleep with lullabies, and there's an element of magic now inside of it. And I'm glad you mentioned the secret societies that might be using this to alter people's minds, and they're using music as a mind-altering technology. Now, it's been mentioned that Capitol Records, there's many rumors of different record companies, both here and in the UK, and I'm sure you've been, I don't want to name names, but the Boleskine House comes to mind, and Aleister Crowley's old place of, and Led Zeppelin. Is there any truth to this?
I have heard stories, and I'm quite happy to believe them, that it is a regular occurrence in some of the mainstream recording studios that when they have finally made a master of an LP or a song, they take it in a physical form, like a CD or a hard disk or something. They take it to a room that is kept aside for doing magical ceremonies, and that they actually cast a full-blown spell on this master before it is taken to the reproduction and distribution plant to be turned into millions of copies or something. Now, whether you have any belief that somehow, noughts and ones in a digital recording of something can get affected by such a thing, that's very hard to reach and to understand for a lot of people, and fair enough. But you have to at least understand that recording studios, recording companies, music companies are not in the business of wasting time and money while they're trying to rinse dry musicians and audiences to make a buck. So why would they do such a thing as a master of a
yeah, man, I totally understand. I get it. Mm-hmm.
Before they take it to distribution, and yet they do. They're
so
known about it, and they've always preferred that we don't know about it. Mm-hmm. That's what makes music such a dangerously powerful thing in our culture, more so than it is in other cultures around the world, because we have been conditioned into not believing that music can have these powerful effects, because we are so unguarded about its capacity to change us. It has free reign over us.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can hear a song, and a song can take you to moments. It's almost like a time machine. It can take you to emotions that you didn't expect. It can take you to places that are hard to explain. And yet, I guess the trouble with this is, as we watch the youth, that they're listening to nursery songs at 3, and then they move on to other things. What do we need to watch out for, Simon?
If you're asking about what can a parent do to help a child actually grow up without being psychically molested by this magic, it's a tricky thing. First of all, that parent has to be self-aware, aware of what music does to themselves, so that they can be conversant about that with their children and pass on that skill and that knowledge to their children. And that can take time. That is actually something that I have written a course to do that for music lovers, to heighten their sensitivity to the emotional and psychic effects of music. I wrote it as a book originally, and I've decided to rejig it into a more interactive internet course, which I'm in the process of making at the moment, so that will be available soon to people. But to cut it down to really simple things, before you ever need to get that complex with it, consider what are you letting your child actually listen to. If what you're letting your child listen to is music that you can see by its presentation, by the channels through which it's come through, by the attitudes within it, that it is music simply there to cause a buzz, or to cause offense, or to do nothing but make people want to dance and scream and jump about. Anything which is there for the simplest hit in music, the sugar and the salt and the fat and nothing else, while you're looking at or you're hearing music there, that is made just to make a buck. And the chances of it having a lot of pro-life, pro-consciousness, pro-human attributes inside it is fairly damn low. In order to find music that is actually going to help your child grow and become psychically strong, I would suggest that you go looking for music that A, makes you feel good, makes you feel clever, makes you feel balanced, and also music that you can see by its place in and time in history and in space, that it was written by somebody who was trying to write art and not simply trying to get a hit. And while I am a musician steeped in music, who can obviously see those things, I don't think it's too difficult for any person to do a little bit of research into musicians and see whether they were people who were just in it for the fame and the money, or that they were people who were really deeply involved in music. Because by the time anybody is deeply involved in music, even if they are wrapped up in the music industry, it's hard for the music industry to strip that music back down to something which becomes inhuman again. Use your instinct.
Wow. Makes perfect sense. And, I noticed that my 2-year-old daughter, after watching Disney for 20 minutes, she'll jump up and down like she just had sugar. So it's a very interesting explanation, but so true.
Yeah, you have to be this is the thing, you have to be very careful, not just with, letting your child go on YouTube and download music videos or something like that, but that kind of commercial music is everywhere now, isn't it? As soon as we switch on a screen or we walk into a shop or a mall or anything, there is that kind of music playing. So, yes, it's very difficult to be looking over your child's shoulder the whole time while that's going on. One thing you can do straight away with children, and it's a great thing to do regardless of whether it's about music or not, simply help your child become conversant, become aware of what their experience of music has just done to them. So when you see your daughter running around like a firework, screaming after listening to 20 minutes of Disney, then just say to her, do you realize that it was the Disney songs that did that to you? Do you like being in this place? Is it fun being in this place, or is it exhausting? And just let her actually think about it for a moment. The more we can help everybody, not just our children, the more we can help everybody become a little bit more aware of what is going on those 2 or 3 layers down from our conscious mind when we imbibe music, and to just stop for a second and observe ourselves and go, well, what did it do then? Rather than just, that's good, I got that music hit, but what was it? What has changed? Oh, that's curious. As soon as we begin to think like that, it becomes something much more handleable, much more in our awareness. It's the reason it's so tricky is because, especially in the West, we are so driven into dealing with our thoughts through our visual cortex. So it's very easy to understand that if you show a child pictures with insanely bright colors in them and all sorts of jagged angles inside the pictures, then they will become overstimulated. It's easy to understand if you see pictures of horrifying things that it's going to upset a child. It's not difficult to extend that kind of awareness through to any kind of music. You just have to understand that music does have just as much of an immediate power on that level as any visual art does.
And it's very interesting that, everybody kind of knows what you're talking about when you say, I mean, music, you can tell immediately what genre you're listening to. And, I used to listen, it kind of went from, not to bore you, but it kind of went from reggae to rap and then completely just classical all the time. And, it seemed like it went from down to lower. And then, in my opinion, that my life got a ton better when I listened to mostly classical music. But it has been pushed for years and years, this industry. What could be the motive behind it?
Okay, I've been looking at your podcasts, and you like seriously deep, dark conspiracy, don't you?
I do. I do.
You do, yes. Okay, well, can I ask, do you understand the story of the Archons, as told by the Gnostics?
I do. I'm not sure if all my listeners do, but I would.
Then I will explain that in as short a manner as I can for you. The Archons are, in the Gnostics' view, it's a religious philosophical story that you can use as a model. That's what I do, or you can take it for reality. That's what John Lamb Lash does, the guy who taught it to me. The Archons are an accident from the creation of the earth. They are leftover astral energy that did not have any place in the physical realm. And as such, what was created out of this spilt astral energy was some kind of non-organic intelligence that cannot exist on our physical plane and yet can interface with us on the mental plane. To put that in simple English, they can speak through our minds, and they have perfected the art of making those speeches sound like our thoughts. So an Archon is a creature that is insanely jealous of our realm and the sheer possibility and beauty and spectacle and everything about our world, yeah? They're jealous of us being here, but they cannot be here with us. So their next best thing that they can do is to use a human being as an avatar. Just like you might play Grand Theft Auto 5, and you can't actually live in San Andreas, but you can, with the help of a computer and a character on the screen, go and experience lots of things inside San Andreas, yeah? Mm-hmm. The Archons would like to use, and have been using, humans just like that, because that's what they can do. They plug into our minds and they experience life through us. The thing is, in order to be able to really successfully do this, they have to dehumanize us to some degree. They have to actually switch off the more human and higher reaching and soul integrated parts of our minds. They need to dumb us down. They need to turn us into automatons. Now, if that is the case, what would be a better way of doing it than using such an invisibly powerful force as music to slowly dehumanize and turn people into robots? You think about what music sounded like in 1780 and how human and complex and rich and immediate and ephemeral, to the degree that nobody had recordings. You simply had to be there in front of the musician and cherish it the moment it was there, and then it was gone again. All of this has gone. In 2020, you can pick up a piece of plastic or even just connect some electrons through your phone and get this artifact, this commodity through your devices, which has been stamped and ironed and straightened out beyond any sense of being human. And the chances are, if it's like most music made on computers nowadays, it's been made in practically less time than it takes to actually listen to it. With the virtuality of modern MIDI digital audio workstations, as they're called, the computers that people write music on nowadays, with the way that those things are set out, it is quite possible to write music that lasts an hour in 5 minutes flat and then put it on a disc and publish it in less time than it would take anybody to even experience it. Now, if that's not removal from the physical plane into the astral plane, I don't know what is.
Right. We should be careful about thinking it's just music. It can't hurt me.
Well, it can heal you and it can hurt you, but what I want people to understand is that the more music seems to come from machines, the more music is served through machines, it is amplified through machines, it is published to us through machines. Even when you see somebody live nowadays, the chances of you actually hearing the vibrations of their instrument acoustically are pretty low. Most people use power amplification for everything. Every aspect where machines has got in the way between the performer and you is one more level of that connection between human beings feeding us being blocked off. And in the element of in the moment of being blocked off, possibly even being edited so that it is less subtle, so that it is more uniform.
Wow. Modern music may be stunting us, it sounds like.
I'm absolutely sure it is. If music teaches us, it's been. Let me try and gather my thoughts here. It's been scientifically demonstrated in recent years that music has an effect on infants' capacity for language complexity and therefore capacity for understanding. And it's been demonstrated that by playing certain forms of life-enhancing music, or I don't think the studies went on the negative side, but they certainly went on the positive side. It's been demonstrated that even before children can speak, before they've learned to actually form words properly, playing them good music can actually result in a statistically noticeable upping of their capacity to communicate well and to understand well and to philosophize well later in their childhood and perhaps later in life.
It's absolutely
that has to do with you feeding children increasingly complex music with increasingly complex transactions and thematic variations and everything that a language can be as it gets more and more complex. The trouble is that we don't do this anymore. If you listen to what 16-year-olds are listening to, it might be in its vocabulary filled with things too harsh for 2-year-olds to want to listen to in sense of booming and grinding and crashing noises. 16-year-olds might be listening to music that's too harsh for toddlers on that sense. But in the sense of how much complication, how much mind-stimulating complexity and game playing, if you like, with thematic ideas is going on in 16-year-olds music, it's little better than nursery rhymes. And if that's the case, then that is what's affecting those 16-year-olds. No wonder they might come out stunted in their communication capacities or even emotionally unable to express themselves or to understand themselves. It's because we are laying down beneath the level of our thought processes these examples through music of just how complex or not our thought processes can be. If all you ever experience is exceedingly simple arguments, exceedingly simple statements, you get used to that environment and you copy it. Mm-hmm. That's what's bringing us down from music. It's not that necessarily a lot of music is filled with some kind of sonic evil. No, it's not. There are bits of it, and I think some of us feel it when it comes and when we hear it. But I don't think that's the big danger here. The big danger here is simply being turned into automatons by music that behaves like an automaton because it was written on a machine.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I this is an opportunity, I think, out in the open that people have to kind of better themselves, rise up. And it doesn't have to be classical music, but just more complex music. I prefer classical. But I mean, here is an obvious, you see it all the time on TV. People joke around about it. When they show the elites, they always have the classical music in the background as a joke, quote unquote.
Yes.
And the joke's on us. The joke is on us. Like, it's right there in plain sight, and the joke is on us. It's a choice.
Can I ask you about your history of your love of classical music? Did you always love it as a child and it grew more, or did you encounter it once and it hooked you?
I encountered Beethoven and it hooked me. I heard Beethoven first I couldn't take 3 seconds, but I promised someone that I would listen to an entire song and I was hooked.
How old were you when that happened?
I was I was in my 30s.
Right, so there we are. Did you feel like suddenly you were filled with something that you hadn't been filled with before?
Passion, yes.
Yeah, there's a humanness to Beethoven that, it's frankly hard to match in a lot of other music, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But what I'm trying to point out here is that you don't have to deeply educate yourself and lead up to this in some way. It's obvious from your history that it's possible to have lived, to go back to my food analogy, it's possible to have lived a life eating nothing but pink slime chicken nuggets and mashed potato, mm-hmm. and then suddenly be given fruit in your 30s and go, oh my God, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You just have to have your ears and your heart and your mind open so that not only will it notice when you find that music which feeds you like that, but you'll also notice the part of yourself which has become habit that would reject that kind of music in a moment because it's some kind of challenge or, you're frightened of it being overly complex. There are so many people who will almost instinctually, without a single conscious thought, back away from certain kinds of music, just from sheer unfamiliarity. And yet they're actually bored with their emotional state on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Fascinating. Yes, I can't agree more. And it's strange how classical music can make the mind work in a more beautiful way, and modern music may be stunting us. Is it strange? I'm glad we brought up Beethoven, because is it strange that IQ tests are, well, you've heard, obviously, I'll let you explain to our listeners about the Mozart Effect, because I'm sure you know about it.
Sure, yeah. The Mozart Effect was measured by scientists. I've already explained a little bit of it, but it's dubbed the Mozart Effect. It's the fact that if you play Mozart specifically to children, they will measurably improve in their communication and language skills, their mathematical skills, their spatial reasoning, and even their emotional regulation skills. All of this will go up. This is something that can be measured to some degree in other classical music composers as well. It's just something that, because Mozart was such an instinctual genius at getting so many layers of his music to work in the same direction at the same time, it has such a powerful effect where others would only have a mild effect. But this was only looking in one direction for one thing. There are even more fundamental measures of this kind of thing that were done a long time ago that people prefer not to look at because they are very worrying. For instance, it was something well understood by the 70s that you could play in two separate isolated rooms. You could play classical music to one bunch of plants, yes, plants, mm-hmm. and you could play acid metal to another bunch of plants, and guess what happened? Yeah, you might think it's just kind of projective and bigotry to imagine this, but no, it's the truth. The plants in the classical music room thrived, and the plants being played acid rock physically grew away and withered.
Wow. Mind-blowing. And this is a very real effect that music has. It's so wild that the power is right at our fingertips, and the majority of the population just lets it slip right through.
It does, because we've become so used to music as a background thing rather than something that we take right into the foreground of our consciousness. We have background music playing all the time. I personally know people who will never walk around town without headphones on, giving them a, quote, soundtrack to their life. That's what they actually call it. Mm-hmm. It's the idea that you almost need an emotional buffer coming from music just to be able to walk around a city and emotionally survive it. That's how they're using it, but they don't actually have the consciousness to see that this is like saying, right, I'm off into a crowd. I need a big fat spliff before I go.
Yeah, this is a very, music, it is, the manipulation's real. The effect on us biologically is real. And music may be the most powerful type of magic that we can easily access on a daily basis.
I think it is. Consider this for an idea. If you get a piece of very, very complex music which gives you a very complex and educational and enlightening journey by listening to it, there will be a solid chance that there is something inside that music, a melody, that you could pick out and sing for yourself while you're just walking down the street. And it's not like when you pick out that melody and sing it to yourself while you're walking down the street that you are merely experiencing 1/100th of that piece of music by doing that to yourself. That melody is actually some kind of psychological key back into the experience of a whole piece of music. This is one of the powers of music, is that it can enfold and compress thoughts and ideas and emotions and even memories and experiences down into tiny little memes that you can carry around in your memory. When we become aware of this sort of thing, we are going to have a tool which not only serves us instead of us eventually going down the slope into serving it, as it is right now. Not only that, but it will be a common magic understood by the populace that is a great defense against the social engineering mind warp that we find ourselves battered with every day in 2020.
Yeah, man, I just think, having found what I consider complex, good quality music in my 30s, I can't even imagine what my life would have been like if I would have been fed this from a very young age. I mean, this is very real.
It is very real, and the fact that you discovered it in your 30s quite probably saved you from some kind of psychic burnout or crash.
Sure. Yeah. Sure, absolutely. And it's very interesting that, in schools, people tend to shy away from, I want to play football, I don't want to play the violin. And yet this is a very fertile ground for the mind to just blossom instead of get bludgeoned.
Well, let me talk quickly about something that happened nearby me. I live near Bradford in the UK, and there's a school in Bradford that is highly multicultural. It has many different children from many different parts of the world, all sort of first and second generation immigrants, all convening at this school. And if you know anything about schools like that, you know that they're very difficult to try and maintain any kind of ethos in, because people's philosophies of life are so convergent when there are so many different peoples all coming into a school together. So it's difficult to find a way of keeping that school pointing forwards. And that school in Bradford was actually failing horribly. Scores for children's marks in exams and scores for simply behavior and quality of life for the students and things like that were all absolutely dreadful, until a fellow came along and introduced what's called the Kodai technique back into the school. Now, Zoltan Kodai was a musicologist and composer from the start of the 20th century, and he had a philosophy of musical pedagogy, meaning there was a manner in which you could use music and movement to help children grow as individuals. And all this school did was to instigate a little bit of music and movement back into every day for every student. And a year and a half later, the entire school had been turned round, and people were looking forward to going to school, and they were getting high marks in exams again. And it was all simply because they had stepped back from this need to shove the STEM subjects, the science and the maths and you name it, and actually treat children like human beings that had complex psychic lives going on for themselves, that needed help, that needed nourishment from activities that they actually saw coming from the adults around them. And as soon as that was re-established in school, the behavior, the quality of the thinking, and just the whole ethos of the school measurably improved to the degree that that teacher... I'm trying to find his name here for a second. Let me just actually give you his name, because he is worth actually talking about. Just pick over my notes here.
Mm-hmm. Unbelievable.
Where have I put him?
Such mind-blowing information. Man. It's really...
No, I've lost that. No, okay, but the point is, that teacher was nominated for a Global Teacher of the Year award for what he did for that school. And all he did was simply reinstate music and dance back into the school.
Wow. Unbelievable. It's not just music. I mean, these are frequencies the mind is aware of. And I mean, when you really think about it, the ears are like an orifice, just like the mouth or the nose, and it's something that definitely it takes something in. It lets us know what's around us.
It does. All I can offer your listeners is the idea that we have to remember that we have been programmed into a visual culture. We're all extremely visual creatures nowadays, probably more so now than we ever were 40 years ago, simply because we spend so much time in front of screens taking in information through our eyes. It's not just looking at things anymore, it's actually getting to grips with the world constantly through our eyes. Now, we can do the same thing with our ears, but we've just been conditioned out of doing so that our ears can be a portal for things to be poured into us subconsciously instead of consciously. And that is what we have to address in ourselves before we can genuinely say that we've become sovereign beings. Because until that point, we are still under some form of black magic.
Man. Wow. Such a wealth of information, Simon. I could talk about this for hours and hours, but let's cut to the chase. Before we go into, I'm going to link your GoFundMe page and your website as well. But before we go into that, I'd like to talk about how religion, churches, the proportions, spiritually, this parallel is there in many different ways for those that don't believe. Can you go into just a quick bit of that and then into where people can keep up with you?
Whoa. Well, okay. Well, you ask an enormous question at the last moment there. The idea of proportion and, sacred spaces and religion in connection with music is a very big thing. I will say one thing about that. Mm-hmm. Proportion is a holy thing. We know that from if you're energy sensitive at all and you go into a cathedral which has been built with beautiful proportions, you can feel it around you almost instantaneously. Music in its old form was much more involved in those proportions. One of the things that's happened in the last 120 years is that this thing that we, in the West, we all do now, which is to play our music in equal temperament. That is the tuning system that we use, where we subdivide an octave into 12 equal steps, 12 equal notes. This practice that we do, we do simply because it's a beautiful convenience. It means that we can fit harmonies together like you can fit Tetris blocks together, and they always tessellate. That's the only reason that we do it. But this practice of dividing the octave equally by 12, which we have been almost exclusively doing for the last 120 years, is actually banishing from our music the accuracy of what you might call sacred proportions. Sacred proportions do exist. They do have measurable effects on nature. The golden section is the very most obvious one of all of these. But proportions do exist, and in music older than the end of the 19th century, if you follow it back, you find that music becomes more and more involved in its tuning systems in pure proportions. And it is this removal of that very subtle background of change that non-equal tunings would give you. It's, as I've been banging on about, it's another element of music that's been ironed flat recently. Mm-hmm. And because of this, it now no longer in most music contains anything that could be called a pure proportion. So imagine that cathedral that gives you that buzz when you walk into it. and move all the walls so that they're 4 or 5% off from their place and everything's a little wonky and just not as it was, and you find the place won't feel the same anymore. Well, the same is going on in music, and it has been for a long time now. And there is a underground swell of musicians who call themselves Zen Harmonists, meaning people who work with harmony that is foreign. That's all that Zen means, yeah? Alien. Mm-hmm. What they mean by that is it's not 12-tone equal temperament. We're doing something different. There is a groundswell of it going on in the world at the moment. People using what's called just intonation or 31-tone equal temperament or whatever other experimental and historically well-known tuning systems there are. And it's being kept at bay by the sheer proportion of music which is horribly ironed out into 12-tone equal temperament. And because of this, well, I'm losing my thread slightly here, but what I'm trying to say is I can see the end of a time when those proportions were banished from music. There is music coming, and it is part of my mission that I've accepted for myself in this world, mm-hmm. to bring back into our culture holy proportion in music and the truly startling effects that it can have.
Wow, it is so amazing. Such an amazing subject, and you're so knowledgeable of it, Simon. Where can our listeners go to your GoFundMe? Can you also give us your website and where they can follow you?
Okay, I won't send them to my GoFundMe now because that's finishing off. But I have a single-page website at the moment, despite everything I'm saying, and I sound ready to help people with this. My website is actually not quite ready yet, so I have a single page there, and that website is theconsciousmusicschool.com. And if you go there, you can put your name and email in, and I will send you an email as soon as the website is more fully functional and I have things to show you. In the meantime, if you want some more understanding of the kinds of things that I teach, you can find the Conscious Music School as a channel on YouTube and on Mind.com and on BitChute.
Great stuff, and that's where I saw you. Great stuff. Amazing, the parallels and everything that you've done. Your research is fascinating, and I can't wait to talk to you again, Simon. Thanks so much for coming on.
It's been a really fun conversation. I'd love to talk to you again very soon. Thanks, Ryan.
All the best, my man. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
There you have it, guys. Simon Siddol. Go over and check out what he's got going on. It's absolutely amazing. The research, the familiarity, and the goals that he's set himself for himself to help us all realize how important this is. And it's not just music. Support him. And definitely support yourself and your health and your well-being. Until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like it need Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like it need Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off.